Hello, Podcast Collective Consciousness. I hope all is well in your world. This is the Reconsider Simon podcast. In this audio space, I'll explore consciousness, ufology, high strangeness, the esoteric, spirituality, even the very essence of reality itself. Episode number 2. Pendulums, dowsing and radiesthesia. So I recently just produced and released a new YouTube video, mainly surrounding the ideas of how to use a pendulum. And this belongs, like I mentioned in the video, to dowsing and divination. For the majority of people, they'll know things like tarot cards, that's divination. And so, you're asking questions or trying to gather ideas about the future through the use of cards and a narrative that creates. And sometimes it can be quite a complex narrative because you've got the meaning of the visuals in the cards and the numerical numbers of the cards as well. And then obviously the shapes and what the pictures are depicting in the tarot cards. So there's multi-layered information going on. And then the next one after that in terms of well-known divination, I guess, would be dowsing rods. So they're L-shaped rods, which traditionally have been used to find water and ley lines and minerals in the ground. They're very well known. And then pendulums really sort of vaguely linked to dowsing rods, in my opinion, because both of them you can ask for informational purposes, but also you can use the pendulum to a degree in the field to find any energy lines, but it's less accurate than the L-shaped rods of dowsing rods. For the majority, people use pendulums for asking questions about their life, about spirituality, about healing, losing things, locating things on maps. There's a whole host of different applications. And it was through the actual process of making this video that I discovered a whole area, which we're going to talk about later, of pendulums that I'd never heard before. It all stems from France and other areas of Europe. So there's a real deep science to it that I wasn't really aware of before in terms of energies. So there's going to be a whole load of learning I need to do in the subsequent months ahead to try and get my head around these new types of pendulums and new applications for them as well. But like I mentioned before, for the most part, I use pendulums in terms of my spiritual. I have a journal. I jot questions down a lot of the time, sort of in terms of planning my life, or used it quite a lot in inner child healing as well. It's been quite powerful. So the whole host of reasons why I use a pendulum. But like I mentioned in the video, sometimes there has been periods when I've relied too much on the pendulum, and that can be a bit of a trap. And so it's important to have, I think at the end of the day, humanity is developing their ideas of intuition and becoming more in tune with their bodies and nature and the planet as a whole. So hopefully we'll get better at using this intuition to make better decisions. And I think more and more abilities will come online as well in terms of the human vessel, the human body and what it's capable of. But all these things like divinational tools, I think might start to fall away a bit because we'll just have that innate intuition about what to do or what direction to take. So pendulums and tarot cards will become less and less useful. But I could be jumping ahead of myself here. Fundamentally, what is a pendulum? Because up until a few years ago, I'd never heard of it. I'd obviously heard of tarot cards, I'd heard of dowsing rods, but pendulum was a completely new thing to me. And essentially all it is, it's a weighted object. It tends to be made of crystal or metal. You can get, there's a whole range of different materials that they use for the weight. And then attached to it is a piece of string or more traditionally a chain. And then all you're doing is you're holding that pendulum with your hand, and then you're asking questions. And then, strangely, the pendulum reacts to your questions. It starts to produce a movement. In my case, it either rotates different directions, clockwise or anti-clockwise, depending what the answer is. And it can be very binary. It's like a yes or no answer. But there is more nuance to it. I don't know answers. You can also use it defining taking you in certain directions, whether in a physical space or on a map. And then for that action to occur, it usually swings back and forth, and you just follow that motion to locate something either on a map or again in a physical space like a building or outside, etc. So that's the fundamental principle of a pendulum. It's essentially you asking questions and then you having generally accurate answers, not 100%. I find different areas I get more accurate answers. If it's quite an emotionally charged answer where I really want something to happen, I tend to end up influencing the pendulum, and therefore it's a less accurate answer. I get the answer that I want. But it kind of comes to the idea of like, where are these answers coming from? Which fascinated at the beginning when I started to mess around with the pendulum. Is that some kind of entity outside of me? Is it me itself doing that? Some sort of spirit, some ancestor? What I like to think it is, and I don't know definitively why, what I like to try and think it is, it's like a higher self. And I've now try and follow the label inner divine self, which is more connected to you. The higher self feels a little bit disconnected and above you in a way. So I try to think of my inner divine self, all knowing self, maybe the subconscious, is giving me these accurate answers. And at the very beginning, it was very interesting. The physicality is like, how the hell does this pendulum move? Is it happening independently? Is it just like willing this clockwise or anti-clockwise movements just spontaneously? Or is it actually me doing it? And what I found out is actually it is your arm that kind of makes the movement. But it's not conscious. It's like a reflex, like if someone kind of hit your knee in a particular position, you get like a knee-jerk reaction to it. It's the same thing. When you ask the question, it's just your arm willingly moves the kind of the pendulum. And I've never messed around with a Ouija board, but I guess it's a similar kind of mechanism, really. So yeah, that's in my point of view anyway. That's what's kind of creating the movement of the pendulum. But it is very unconscious. You're not, unless you like I mentioned before, emotionally want a particular answer. Sometimes I think it is you influencing, but for the most part, it's like an unconscious action. So in this podcast, really, I wanted to really explore more deeply about my own experiences with pendulums, how I first started, but also a bit more of a deeper dive into the more esoteric ideas of pendulums. Because the YouTube videos are very practical, kind of gives a brief overview of the whole process. So yeah, this is more of a kind of a deeper dive into pendulums and more personally focused as well. And that leads me to, where did I first learn about pendulums? And again, I've never really come across pendulums. And it wasn't until I went to a conference in America, in California, Contacts in the Desert. I've spoken about it in other areas of content. I think it was the second time I've been to Contact in the Desert. And Contact in the Desert is like a massive, it's mainly focused around UFOs and the idea of aliens, etc. But it's very metaphysical in its outreach. So yeah, it has other kind of speakers that aren't particularly linked to the idea of UFOs. It's like alternative archaeology and is kind of elements of spirituality as well. There's a whole host of speakers. I think it might be one of the biggest sort of conferences in America to do with UFOs and spirituality. And a lot the ethos of it has changed a lot over the years. Maybe not for the better, but I still really love going. And that second time, it was actually in this big hotel. It was like luxury hotel. And yeah, and I was one of the speakers I was going to see was a lady called Miria Wheatley, who was a master dowser in her own right, and was a second generational dowser. Her father, Dennis Wheatley, was also a kind of well-known dowser. He'd written books on the subject. She's also written quite a few books. She does courses you can attend as well, various tours around the world, sacred sites. And then she's an international speaker, so hence why she was at Contact in the Desert. So I saw one of her lectures to do with earth energies and dowsing, all of her knowledge, and I was really blown away by it. And then I booked myself onto a workshop as well. which is a more deeper, uh, more of a tutorial, I guess, that it was specifically to do with like how dowsing, and it was slightly limited because she was teaching the techniques like in an indoor situation. But she could convey a lot of information and knowledge, like how to use the, the dowsing rods. So I attended two of her events there. So it's my real first deep introduction to the ideas of dowsing was through her. And what I found over the years, actually, a lot of the information of dowsing, there were lots of well-known dowsers out there who've written books. It tends to be a lot subjective. It's their own experiences. I mean, there is like common threads of accepted approaches in like how you use it, dowsing rods and other tools of divination. But sometimes the results can really depend on who's using the rods, and they all have their own ways of interpreting. I mean, for instance, like Maria Wheatley was just talking about earth energy lines being of male or female origin. So, they would have a masculine expression or a feminine expression. And she treats water in exactly the same way. You'd have like feminine water or masculine water. Like all of nature and the earth, there's a male and female expression. And I remember discussing this, a few years later with a guy who'd actually run, I think he'd set up, he lived in Australia for a point, it was a lot of older gentlemen, and he'd set up sort of dowsing institutions and been the head of various dowsing institutions. And so he's, in terms of like his knowledge and experience, he was quite, deep in. And then I started to talk about male and female based energies in water, and he just like laughed at me like it was crazy. Like he just saw the energy lines or water as just being having no gender expression at all. But that concept from Rhea Wheatley and I guess her father was a very real concept. So again, this sort of alludes to the idea that sometimes the knowledge that these DAOs that they talk about or convey can be subjective to them. But at one of these lectures, I struck a conversation with an American lady there. I think her name is Alicia. Alicia? Anyway, she introduced me to the pendulum. And again, I'd never heard of the pendulum before. And she used it relatively regularly. But for her reason for it is because she sometimes didn't really trust the intuition, so it helped her make choices and decisions. And she used it quite a lot, quite regularly to make various choices. And then so she allowed me to have a go with her pendulum. And initially, I was just completely blown away that you could, ask a question and then it would then just independently move without you really consciously doing anything. So I remember vocally going, "Wow, that's amazing!" And so that was my very first introduction to a pendulum. So after the lecture experience at Contact in the Desert, I had an amazing time. I love going to California. I love going, and I'm quite lucky. So my auntie lives in that area, so I get to stay with them. But yeah, I love going to California. I feel a great affinity with the desert. There's something quite special about that place, and the energies there are really, really potent as well. So you really feel it. And then booked myself onto one of Maria Wheatley's dowsing courses that went over a weekend, like a long weekend. And it was actually slightly after the Contact in the Desert event. So it would actually over the summer months, I think it was in July, she had a dowsing course booked in Avebury, which is in Wiltshire. So that's kind of southwest of the United Kingdom. And that whole area is, very mystical. I'd never really been there before. I'd driven through it because I used to go to a festival called Glastonbury. And so I was aware of places like Stonehenge before, but I'd never really spent a lot of time there at all. And so going to Avebury was a very big first for me. And I'd never really sort of explored Wiltshire or that area very much at all. So it's all a new experience. And my sort of best friend also wanted to join me on that. So we decided to camp and do the course together. And it was just a gloriously sunny weekend. And it was just a nice amount of time, like every single day. She probably only did about 3 or 4 hours. And then it meant we had the rest of the day to kind of chill out and do what we wanted. But it was really practical, hands-on experience about how to use not so much pendulums, but how to use the dowsing rods and about the ley lines and a bit of the history of Avebury as well, and a little bit about Stonehenge, although we didn't visit there at the time. So yeah, there was a real deep initiation into the ideas of dowsing and earth energies and water, underground water, and what Avebury is actually used for. It was amazing, amazing experience. So yeah, the kind of the pendulum really sort of came shortly after that. I bought. I mean, you can buy pendulums everywhere. You can buy them online, and in Brighton, where I live, there's a spiritual shop there, and they had a various collection of pendulums there. No, I think actually the first pendulum I bought was at there's a shop in Avebury, and they have dowsing tools there, so I bought the pendulum from there. Um, but I did have a habit of losing. There was a couple of pendulums I got now, I managed to sort of hold on to, but I'd always like seem to lose pendulums. So maybe these weren't they weren't supposed to stay with me. I was supposed to kind of find the pendulums I have now. Um, so yeah, I was using the pendulum based off what Maria Wheatley had told me how to use it through her course materials. And she was big on, ethics in terms of like the questions you can and can't ask. Is this sort of subjects I touch upon in the video, not breaking someone's free will, asking questions about other people that don't have your permission, things like financial gain being a bit of a no-no, sort of trying to find, numbers of lottery numbers, etc. Best stay away from that. So the whole like ethics to do with like what kind of questions you can ask with a pendulum. But I just started to journal a lot of these questions down. I've actually probably got about 5 or 6 journals of like all these various questions that I've asked over the years. And yeah, it's a little bit embarrassing actually because I've kind of got all these journals, and it's like my mum was saying she doesn't really like want to journal her true feelings down sometimes because she's embarrassed that when she dies that people would find it and they'd read it. But I'm a bit more cavalier. I care less about that because I mean you'll be dead, so it's not like you're gonna care. Whatever happens when we leave this mortal coil. I'm sure that's the last of your concerns really, is like what you wrote down in your journal. But yeah, I mean, like some of the questions I've asked over the years, quite out there, I think. So yeah, it'd be an interesting delve into my strange psyche. So yeah, I write and I journal a lot of the questions down. And I have had periods where maybe obsessively done that a little bit too much. I think it's sort of, yeah, it can be a good tool every now and then to get insights. Been particularly good with like health, and I've used it a lot. And I'm not always been that accurate. I do need to point that out as well. I mean, it can give you inaccurate, but so I always look at it as a general guide and stuff. And sometimes I have had some real successes using the pendulum in terms of health and also healing, emotional healing, inner child healing, and be able to kind of pinpoint particular problems and using the pendulum to sort of explore that has been really useful. So really powerful little tool. I mean, one of the tools you can combine with a pendulum is the use of maps, whether it be like star charts or physical maps of where you live or other areas of the world. I bought a series of maps specifically for use on the pendulum. I have like a global map, but like all countries, but then also one specifically for the United Kingdom, but then also the area of Sussex as well. I've got one, a star chart, and yeah, I've done a few experiments with the pendulum and in combination with these maps. And I remember one time I used the pendulum and with specifically one for the Brighton area, and I was like, take me to a location on this map that I need to go. And it was over a weekend, and I was fully prepared just to go there on the whim of what the pendulum comes up with. And strangely, it just came up with like a golf course, sort of more in the western outreaches of Brighton. So I thought, okay, well, I'll just drive there. So got in my car, drove all the way there. It was a bit weird because it was like a very private golf course. And it was really bad weather, I remember. So it was raining, so there wasn't that many people there, which was helpful. And then I just sort of parked my car incognito and just pretended to be a member of this golf course. And I was like, this is really bizarre. I'm just going out here in the whim of a pendulum. And I got out of the car and I noticed there was a path going directly straight through this golf course. I kind of very sheepishly walked past the members bar of the golf course, and then just followed this path up. And I was like, well, there's a reason I've been brought here by the pendulum. And it was really strange. I started to get like a real feeling of love, deep feeling of peace and love at this area. And it was just this random golf course. And what was really strange is being areas in Avebury in Wiltshire have had exactly the same experience where I've had like a deep sense of love. My heart started to sing. But when this has happened, strangely, it was also raining as well. And there's a particular type of bird like swallows. They fly in a murmuration in unison. It's like this cascading wave of birds. And I remember seeing that when I was having this reaction in my body in Wiltshire. I was watching these murmurating swallows, and it was peeing down with rain. And it was exactly the same outdoor conditions at this golf course. And I was getting the same bodily reaction, this real feeling of deep sense of love and peace. But I was seeing these birds as well, and it was obviously peeing down with rain. So it was very strange correlation between the two experiences. And yeah, my pendulum had sent me there. It was all pretty cosmic. So, diving deeper into the realms of pendulums, it was through researching my YouTube video that I stumbled across a channel called Society for Scientific Exploration. It looked like a channel they invite various speakers from various very cosmic, esoteric subjects to talk about what they do as practitioners with a more scientific understanding and principle behind it. So it's not kind of airy-fairy, just like intuition, knowledge. They want actual evidence, like hard evidence. And so the whole talk around pendulums and dowsing, it has a very sort of scientific edge to it in terms of the people that have done actual proper research into these areas. And so this lady was sort of talking about, and it just completely opened my eyes to the depths of knowledge with pendulums. And there's a particular phrase, and I'd never heard it before. It's called radiesthesia, which is a French word, and it's a combination, I guess, like radio and another word, Latin word. She did mention this in the video. And yeah, a lot of the kind of investigators and scientific explorations have come from France. So there's a real deep knowledge from France to do these techniques. And she was very adamant to sort of point out that, it's only your imagination really that limits the scale of application of pendulum dowsing. And it can look at the cellular all the way to the cosmic. So it's like micro, macro. So it's a really powerful tool. And she reiterates in this video that it's a real sacred science. It's a real combination between, the use of the human body as a vessel and a pendulum to access and retrieve non-local information. And very much treated as a secret science developed in China, Egypt, and Europe later on in areas like France. But it was her opinion that it really triggers a deep development of a person's consciousness when they start to use things like, tarot or pendulums and dowsing, like L rods. It really triggers a deep fundamental consciousness shift within the person itself. So pendulums can be really powerful tool for elevation spiritually as well. And during the talk, she started to delve more deeply into Egyptians and how they accessed and used, and who knew that there's particular areas of knowledge is to do with pendulums. And specifically pharaohs and kings. They were the only select few that were granted, initiated into the knowledge of pendulums and how to use them, and the power and the depth that you could use them, and the expanse and the knowledge that you could be gained from using these tools. And they were passed down from pharaoh to king, etc. But the general populace, the commoners, they were given dowsing rods and they were taught how to find water and minerals, really rudimentary techniques. But the really powerful stuff with pendulums was kept for the pharaohs. That was their sacred knowledge. Commoners weren't allowed to know this. But in terms of what are divination techniques like dowsing rods or pendulums, and what are they reacting to? I mean, they're reacting to energy, and everything is energy. We're all made up. I mean, we think things are solid, but they're not. It's still energy to a degree. And even any shape object has its own energy signature, and that's all really kind of pendulums and dowsing rods are reacting to. Whether it would be inanimate object, it's reacting to the energy of that, or it could be the energy of an idea it's reacting to. That's when you ask a question for informational dowsing. It's reacting to a particular energy signature. And she stated in the video, it even translates to specific signatures of typography used in various languages. That all has an energy. It emits an energy signature, which potentially can be picked up by a pendulum in combination with the human body. And we can delve into the idea of energy. And again, it's a different scale thing. It's like a macro, micro, it's a cosmic, it's a cellular. You can look at the larger picture in terms of cosmic frequencies, like cosmic rays, the universe, these big concepts. And you can zoom in a little bit more and you have like telluric currents. So it's to do with planet Earth, like the Earth that we all inhabit, like ley lines, and there's things specifically called the Hartmann grid or the Curry grids. These are all telluric currents. And then zoom in a bit more, you have the human body, and that has its own energy grids like the chakra system and other energy points as well. And you can keep zooming it more and more, and you have these very specialized energy currents or rays that are kind of linked to that particular object or ecosystem. There was a physics engineer based at Stanford University called William Tiller who did a lot of experimentation to do with energy. And he had the statement that every organism or substance radiates and absorbs energy via unique wave fields. Animate or inanimate, there is a measurable extended force field that exists around all forms of matter. And it's fascinating because really the human being is acting as an instrument. The pendulum really is acting as an antenna, an indicator. It allows us to tune into these various unique signature waveforms that are produced by these ideas or objects. Later on in the video, Dominique also starts to discuss the idea of consciousness itself and how it might be segmented into different areas. And she defined these areas specifically, saying consciousness is your logical, rational, judgmental, critical ego mind, what the majority of people probably work on day to day. But then there's also the subconscious, which is all your emotional baggage, your problems, the societal programs, the unresolved issues that you carry around. And then there's the unconscious, which is a type of what she described as a portal intuition, non-local information, and a natural function of having a soul. She highlighted a professor, Professor Eugene Chevreul, who was a chemist and came from the French Academy of Sciences. And again, France and a lot of mainland Europe being quite well known for their real deep scientific experiments and exploration into the ideas of dowsing and energy. And this individual did a lot of research with radiesthesia. It was this chemist's opinion that each type of thought produces a very specific type of movement or energy field. And we're using the unconscious to capture this type of information through using of the pendulum. So mainstream science, why does it refuse to accept or look into these areas of dowsing and pendulum using radiesthesia? One of the big points is that they choose to ignore it. The real connectivity function of the unconscious mind they choose to ignore. And the capability of the human being to be a resonance instrument, again, they just can't accept that. Mainly down to the point that they can't prove it with any mechanistic methodologies or instruments. They just don't have the instruments to measure some of these effects. They just don't exist. So therefore, in their eyes, it doesn't exist at all. When people are using these tools of divination, such as pendulums, what are we tuning? We know we spoke about with the human body as an instrument, we're tuning to the energy. But there's such a grand scale to this. And there's a really good quote by Russell Targ, and he's been involved a lot with Stanford research to do with remote viewing. Again, sort of the mainstream opinion remote viewing is that it doesn't exist, but there is so much evidence that it's worked and been incredibly successful for many, many years. And Russell Targ was one of the main guys, co-founders of a project through Stanford research. They went on to develop the remote viewing sort of protocols, the tools. And so he's very much aware of how energy works and consciousness. And it all kind of links into the idea of a holographic universe. And his quote goes like this: it's like, our reality is a hologram whereby each region of time and space contains information about every other point in time and space. This information is readily available to our awareness. In the holographic universe of David Bohm, who's the founder of the actual theory, there is a unity of consciousness, a greater collective mind with no boundaries of time and space. So does this statement very neatly just encapsulate how powerful the pendulum is that through that very focused point of time and space where you're sat in your chair using that pendulum, you're able to access all that non-local information through the entire history of time and the universe, because every small point of time and space encompasses every other aspect of time and space. It's obviously all connected. I mean, this is what we're dialing into when we use the pendulum, which, when you think about it, is such a grand idea. Like, it's massive. It's massive. Going back to the mainstream, overall, they're very good at accepting what they call technical energy. So things like microwaves and X-rays, because they could be measured. But because things like the telluric currents, like the earth energies or human energies, by them can't be measured, therefore it doesn't exist. They don't have any instruments to measure. But with the human body, I mean, again, it's its own ecosystem. And again, ideas of macro and micro come into it. And there's the larger network of energy probably works overall across the body, throughout within the body. But it always also goes down to the very cellular level as well. Actual kind of disease having a particular energy frequency and a particular radiance that can be picked up with the pendulum, which where it starts to get really powerful as a tool for healing and be able to pick up these diseases or imperfections that are going on in the body, so you can diagnose what's happening to people if they're ill for any particular reason. So the human body as a whole, or going down to the cellular, there's a radiance, there's a vibration of healthiness. And then if you don't have that vibration, obviously something's wrong, and you need to sort of diagnose what the issue is to resolve it. This is when the pendulum becomes really powerful as a tool when combined with some of the research done by some of these European dowsers. There's one particular one called the Bovis scale, which gives a whole spectrum of different frequencies from, healthy to unhealthy. And it can be used in a range of situations, particularly for the human body, and also deciding on food for, particular dietary reasons, but also larger scale ecosystems like buildings. This chart can be used in combination with the pendulum to find unhealthy frequencies in a building as well. And on that idea of like physical locations, particularly like buildings, I mean, we have energies flying around that can be electrical or magnetic, and it is deemed by a lot of dowsers, practitioners of radiesthesia, that electrical currents aren't beneficial to humans. I mean, that's a given. That ties into the whole concept of EMF energies, which are causing illness and damaging the natural environment. So electrical energy being harmful to humans, harmful to vegetation and nature. But on the very opposite scale, magnetic energies being actually really, really healing. And it can magnetic charges can be used to decrease things such as cancer tumors and to bring health and balance into a body. I mean, even apparently in the olden days, used to have magnetic baths to help the body heal, just to aid healing. So obviously, with the use of the pendulum, more specifically charts, as well to pinpoint particular frequencies that are emitting in an environment, whether it be outside in a building or a human body. It's an incredibly powerful instrument. It shows us which is electrical and what to avoid and what is magnetic to harness for healing. As we spoke about, the idea of the Egyptians having a deep, deep knowledge of dowsing and energy, more than we know today, we're still uncovering all this sacred knowledge, and there's still more to discover. But 3000 BC, when the Egyptians were around, had such a deep knowledge of some of these harmful waves and how they could be harnessed. And it becomes really fascinating. You get the whole idea of Tutankhamun. When he was uncovered, there was a whole curse that people speculated on, because all these people involved in that excavation started to die or would have horrible things happen to them. And maybe it's linked to because of this knowledge of harmful waves, that these areas, these environments being booby trapped in some way. It's the opinion of some of these dowsers, these academics within dowsing and energy, that the Egyptians were so sophisticated in all the different energy spectrums and the kind of the shape of the building and where objects were placed within a room, that if anyone encroached on these sacred areas, the energies emitted would cause harm to these people. And so it was very intentful that these curses would be basically created by the Egyptians' superior knowledge in these areas. This links into the information brought to us by two dowsing academics, both based in France, one called Chamery, the other one called Belizel. And they did extensive testing together, experimenting with Egyptian radiesthesia and using different setups. And they discovered that these pharaohs and the sacred spaces they created within these tombs did emit harmful energies that cause harm to people if they spent any period of time in there. So it was discovered that these harmful energies, these harmful waves, sat within a particular color spectrum, and that spectrum was within green. And so this negative electric green was found to have the shortest but strongest of all waves, and was even greater than X-rays. So this is why it's so harmful. But it had not just a deterrent purpose in terms of causing harm if people encroached on these sacred spaces, but it had a very practical function as well, because this green energy can mummify flesh and vegetation. So this potentially shows us that these energies also had a very practical purpose in the mummification process of these people. But it's not just the Egyptians that are utilized as green energy. Even the present day, apparently, places in Czechoslovakia and Russia, they're a lot more open to these sort of ideas, and they actually use negative green energy to kill insects and worms and bacteria. So it has a very practical use over there. And also it can be used in a very effective treatment of early cancer treatment. If you can harness these energies in a very specific, accurate way, it can help people beat cancer, essentially. The power of these energies can't be understated, and that's reinforced by this early history of these researchers discovering this negative green energy. Chamery apparently actually died due to overexposure to negative green in his experiments. So it goes to show how detrimental this can be to people's health if they're not careful and not respectful of how they use it. So going back to the Egyptians and their knowledge of this negative green energy, it's incredibly complex how they set up the pyramids in terms of the mummification process and also protecting that entire area. It was found that leaving the body 2/3 of the way up the pyramid emits a powerful electric green energy. And in combination with that, the embalmers placed a powerful poison in the center of the body. This meant that the mummified body turned into an emitter and would emit powerful poisonous waves within the room and to protect the whole site from intruders. But not only that, the combination of all that, the shape of the pyramid, the mummified body, the poison in the center of the body, but there was also motifs and shapes within the room with the money that would actually amplify the entire effect, protecting the whole area even more. I had been made aware of a particular type of pendulum called Egyptian pendulums, one called the Osiris, through the earlier speaker of Maria Wheatley. She teaches a particular course that I was quite interested in. And it's these pendulums, Osiris pendulums, which need to be taken apart and constructed before you actually operate them. And the reason why you deconstruct it is because it emits this negative green energy when the whole thing's screwed together. And you have to be really, really careful because obviously you have overexposure. It can be detrimental to the human body, but used wisely can be a really powerful tool for healing. And because of these Egyptian pendulums, I came across this website called baypendulums.co.uk. And the whole website is dedicated roughly around a particular master dowser, pendulum user called Joseph Bay. He was Polish. I'd never heard of this individual at all. But the website I was really impressed with because it had this huge eclectic array of different pendulums. Pendulums I'd never, it had all the Egyptian ones, various different types, Osiris and other ones. But it also had these one called universal pendulums, which this individual, Joseph Bay, was quite famous for. From what I can gather from limited research, the universal pendulums that I found on this website were specifically created by Joseph Bay in his research into different color-coded energies. And they're quite large and quite sophisticated in the way they work. And again, I'm not totally sure how they do work. I need to learn more. But it's the actual character of Joseph his story is quite incredible from where it started, and quite sad at the beginning as well, because his dowsing journey started in Auschwitz, the concentration camp. And he was only a boy when he was there. And it was during when he was there that he met an individual called Rudolph, a Swiss gentleman. He was a well-known, not a well-known, but he dowsed regularly and knew dowsing very well. And he taught Joseph how to make pendulums and also how to use a pendulum. And he was very impressed how quickly this student he was a quick learner and became really masterful at actually fashioning these pendulums. Apparently, the camp guards of Auschwitz got wind of this dowsing talent and actually put it to good use. And they made him find water for the camp itself. And under extreme conditions of like death, if he didn't find water, then he'd be killed. Thankfully, successfully, he actually found water. And amazingly, he was able to survive the war and got out of the Auschwitz concentration camp and moved back to Poland and basically carried on his dowsing journey and got involved in actual research, quite heavily researched into the areas of pendulums and dowsing himself. He focused a lot on the work of other dowsing academics, such as the French Inel or Belizel, who we mentioned earlier, Chamery, and researched in quite depth, and was able to start producing his own Egyptian-style pendulums. But started to have a new whole sphere of research where it involved the health transmitting benefits of these pendulums in combination with various frequencies and herbs, healing herbs and minerals, which would help the body heal. So personally to me, this is what gets really exciting, this whole new sphere as pendulums has opened up to me. And I was aware there was a certain health benefit to using these pendulums, but I wasn't quite aware of the depth that it goes in terms of being able to manipulate these very specific color-coded energies through the use of these pendulums. It's quite exciting. And again, I'm in the early stages of this, so I don't know an incredible amount. But what I do know so far has really piqued my interest and just expanded the whole universe of dowsing, for me. So there you go. Dowsing pendulum content. I hope you liked it. Yeah, I mean, once I started researching, I thought it was going to be quite straightforward. Me researching a video of existing knowledge I already had, maybe topping up a little bit. But through the process of that, I just discovered this huge new realm that I was completely unaware of. So yeah, it's been a really exciting period of time to kind of uncover all this. And yeah, again, I've really enjoyed just, exploring this subject more with you on this podcast. And thank you so much for joining me. And again, you can find me reconsidersimon.com. I'm on YouTube, I'm on Rumble, I'm on Odyssey. So hopefully catch up with you soon. Have a good day or night. Take care for now. Bye-bye.